Hi everyone, it's the third week of the bootcamp, and for this week's Thursday Thinking, we're really pleased to have our Digital Jersey board member and CEO of Pinpoint, Tom Hacquoil. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Victoria.
And just to get started, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and your company, Pinpoint?
Yeah, so Tom, founder, CEO of Pinpoint. I'm sure we'll talk plenty about me through the very long list of questions that we've got to get through. I think Pinpoint, we're a software as a service business based in Jersey, founded in Jersey by Jersey folk, but 70 to 73% of our revenues in the US. Businesses valued north of £50 million in less than 5 years. We've grown very quickly. And yeah, I think we're probably the largest software export business on the island. So 99.5% of our revenues are not in Jersey, which is probably one of the things that I'm most proud of. And yeah, beside Pinpoint, and again, we'll get into detail on that. This is my fourth business, lots of software stuff, lots of utter failure. We'll talk about that, no doubt. Some success, and also been involved in Digital Jersey since inception, and kind of keen to try and grow people like you here, basically. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Tom. I think we always find it really interesting to hear about the early years. So could you tell us a bit about your background, where you were born, about your education, stuff like that?
Yeah, so born here, which seemingly is quite rare for technical people in Jersey. So kind of that's interesting. But yeah, born in Jersey, very modest upbringing, lived in a tiny flat in town. Dad's a kitchen fitter, mum's a hairdresser, so not technical in any way. I was just basically a massive nerd, right? No sugarcoating it, massive geeky nerd. I think I was very lucky because I'm very tall and I've been this tall since I was 14. So it's only the only reason I wasn't mercilessly bullied as a child. But yeah, I was the kid who asked for books for Christmas. I think some people want to be astronauts and footballers and whatever. I just wanted to be Bill Gates. And I think I spent basically all of my childhood with no friends, sat in front of a computer reading random things on the internet. And I think I've been really lucky from a timing perspective. And I think making assumptions, but glancing around the room, we all seem to be in a kind of tight-knit age bracket. And I think we're kind of children of the internet, right? We've got luxury of having access to this infinite information. And I was very lucky that I spent lots of time in front of a computer kind of learning that stuff. And so went to a little school called Janvrin. I got a scholarship to Vic. I was a nerdy, smart, geeky kid. And I think when I went to Victoria College, it was quite humbling for me because all of a sudden I was surrounded by people who had loads more money than us and were much more successful than me. And I was the smartest kid by some margin at my previous school and definitely the least smart by some margin at my new school. And I think that was quite humbling and kind of gave me a bit of a chip on my shoulder. But yeah, spent lots of time basically learning. I think when I was 13, again, very fortunate byproduct of timing, there was a website called odesk.com, which I think is a freelance job board called Elance now. But basically, I was one of the first people to set up as a vendor on that platform. So I set up and I set my age as 30 and I literally Googled 30-year-old man and took the first picture and used that as the picture. And we were all on Skype at this point, so no one could actually see me when we were doing stuff. And I just started bidding to make websites for people, basically. So I do a £50 website, first of all, and then a £100 website. And people would give me a nice positive rating. And that kind of compounded. And because I was one of the first vendors on the platform, I got a lot of ratings and then came up top on search results. And so as I was kind of growing up, I was basically doing school until 3 and then web design until midnight or whenever I fell asleep. And I was making quite good money. So by the time I was 16, I was making enough money that I was very arrogant and I was thinking why should I listen to you, teach a person, when I make 5 times as much money as you? So off I went to set up a ultimately failed website company. But yeah, I don't want to keep rambling on, so you crack away.
Yeah, so was that your first job then, really, doing the freelance stuff online?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think that was it. I spent all of my evenings doing that. I was very lucky. Again, I got paid to learn, right? And I really enjoyed doing it. It didn't feel particularly arduous. I would buy books, learn to make things. And then eventually people started paying me to make things. And obviously every project you do, you get better at something. And I just did them very frequently. Stakes were very low because I lived with my dad at the time. And yeah, I started making bigger and bigger things. And that kind of ultimately gave me a bit of financial safety net so I could go leave school and rent a flat and things like that and kind of support myself for a while. But also it gave me an underlying level of confidence that someone would be willing to pay for my time, services, effort. And so, yeah, left school and went and did that when I was 16.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you left school at 16 and was straight into work and living on your own.
Yeah. So I think I have the record of like, I got a full scholarship to Vic because I got 100% on the entrance exam. And then I think I got the worst GCSE results they've ever had in 154 years or something. Because I just completely disengaged from school. I wasn't interested. I didn't care. Because to my mind, learning sort of random things that had nothing to do with what I clearly knew I wanted to do was just
didn't resonate with you.
It was just a distraction, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's frustrating because I love learning, but like I like learning things that are relevant and interesting to me rather than sort of learning for the sake of learning. And so, I kind of disengaged, left school when I did that.
And did you ever, were you ever an employee or were you just working for yourself?
I didn't start as an employee. Yeah, so I ran a business and we can go into loads of detail on that. But first business I created was called Infuse Internet. We made websites for people, basically just did what I was already doing on a freelance basis. But I hired some people and trained them up, sometimes through Digital Jersey and sometimes not. And we grew to kind of about 10 people and about £1 million a year in revenue. But I was very good at making websites and basically very bad at everything else. And ultimately, I didn't manage our cash well and we weren't saving for things and we weren't properly forecasting and doing some of the sort of more commercially minded elements of running a business. And then the recession hit, which I'm not blaming my failure on, but the recession hit and basically a bunch of our customers couldn't afford to pay us anymore. And we went from having, let's say, 100 grand a month of revenue to 20 grand a month of revenue very quickly. And as a result of that,
this is like 2000.
This is like 2009, 2010, yeah. And so as a result of this kind of shift in the business, I had to fire all of the staff, which obviously was great fun. I had to leave my flat and sleep in my tiny office and like basically went from kind of hero to zero in about 3 months. And yeah, there's a lot more to the story and we'll get to it if we have time. But ultimately, basically the business failed. And so I had to go and get like a big boy job. And so I went and worked for somebody else, which is actually upstairs, Caligo, the cloud computing business in this building. I worked there for 4.5 years as an employee. Yeah. Okay,
great. Thanks, Tom. So I guess with all that said, did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. I'm like a terrible employee. And people are evidenced by my time at any other company I've ever worked for. Like, I'm good at very specific things, and those things don't tend to be very useful unless you're at the kind of top of the tree, I think. And so, yeah, I did. I always wanted to be a business person. I always wanted to be successful. I wanted to leave like a legacy. I wanted to be remembered for doing something interesting. I wanted to prove everybody that I was like actually successful and stuff like that. So,
yeah. And when it came to Pinpoint, how did you come up with that idea? How did you realize there was an opportunity?
Yeah, so skipping forward a bit, I think having gone through, so I started Pinpoint when I was 26, so I'd been working for almost 10 years at that point, running different things and working for Caligo for 4.5 years. And I guess what I kind of realized over that journey is I'm actually really quite a terrible software developer. That's what I started out doing, but I was never going to be amazing at that. I kind of learned that what I'm actually quite good at is what I would call organizational design. So essentially it's like thinking about companies like their systems, right? And thinking about organizations and people and culture and thinking about those things in a very like logical and geeky way. And I think that the way people design and build organizations hasn't really kept pace with the way the world has moved, and different generations of folks like to work different and think different, and remote's more of a thing. And so all of these kind of externalities came together to create a bit of a melting pot. And I guess going through scaling up a bunch of different businesses, I kind of observed that there wasn't really tools to help people think about getting organizational design right. And so my thing really is that like I want to spend the rest of my life building like this sort of slightly sexier version of very unsexy industries. And so like HR technology is about the only thing that's more boring than cloud computing. And so kind of naturally went there. And again, my kind of long-term plan is to build tools in that whole organizational design space. But bluntly, like with the best will in the world, a really cool business with terrible staff is still a terrible business. And so focusing on like getting that recruitment piece of the puzzle right was sort of what I felt we had a chance to do, and we have.
Got you. Thanks, Tom. And what were like the challenges in the early days of Pinpoint?
Literally everything, and still going now. It's hard, right? Like I think we shouldn't sugarcoat that either. I think like starting a business is really difficult. The environment is really difficult. Trying to do things at scale is really difficult. I think there's also like a big difference between, and again, not being disrespectful, but there's like a big difference between a small business and a startup business, right? So like a small business, like a coffee shop, for example, is a business that is designed to be small. A startup is a small business that's trying to be ginormous. And I think you approach those things incredibly differently. Like if you try and run a coffee shop like a startup, it will miserably fail. But the same is true in reverse. And I think like trying to build a very big business when you're very small is very difficult, right? You have to work long hours. There's a lot of risk you have to take. It's very competitive if you want to export and sell in international markets. You have to work out how to pay for that. It's just pretty miserable, right? And so like everything was a challenge. I think we didn't raise any capital, which made things even harder. It was a very conscious decision. We can talk about why that decision was made. But like, we didn't raise any capital. So I kind of sold my soul as a bit of a consultant for the first 2 years. Like basically just telling kind of pretty archaic businesses how to be slightly less archaic. And they paid us lots of money to do that. And I used that money to hire developers and marketing people and create budget to go do things and sell. And if you imagine that we sort of started where 100% of our revenue was consulting and Pinpoint was just being built and made no money, as Pinpoint made money, we sort of gradually wound down the consulting until it became self-sustainable. But that took 2 years. And that is kind of living life on hard mode, to be honest. But if you can get through that, the sort of second order benefits of that are ginormous, and it's created a lot of optionality for us today that we wouldn't have had if we'd taken on capital early in the process.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about that then? Because obviously if you're not taking money from other people, you retain more equity. Yeah,
so I think that's important. I think what I would say is that I actually didn't personally retain more equity. I just had more equity to give away to really good people. I fundamentally just think that businesses are collections of people. And I've been really lucky because although I kind of sit here and take the credit and have the big job title and everything, like Pinpoint has loads of incredible people in it. And I've got a bunch of co-founders who were there on day one that have done amazing work that the business wouldn't be where it is without those folks, right? And so rather than giving token rich person, typically an old white dude, 20% or 50% of the company, I can give 3 really incredibly smart people 20% or 10% or whatever needs to happen, such that if the business is ultimately successful, they become very successful too. And the same is true for the team. So every member of our team has equity in the business. I think that's really important. We expect a lot from them, but they should expect a lot in return for that, in my view. And so like having a kind of slightly less complicated cap table, so like the list of people who own parts of the company, has been really useful. I think the other thing in terms of raising money is like, I'm very commercial. And so these numbers sound big, but like our plan is to sell our business in the next sort of 3 to 4 years for somewhere in the 3 to 350 million pound sterling range. And like, that's a big number, but actually in the industry that we work in and the market that we compete in internationally, that's quite a small number. And if we had taken, say, venture capital money and we'd raised 50 million pounds to get to this point, which would not be rare, actually we would not be able to sell for 350 million pounds because that wouldn't present an attractive enough return to our investors.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And so what we'd end up doing is kind of forcing ourselves down a path where we would kind of like go big or go home, right? We have to sell for £1 billion or we sell for nothing. And my view was, it's very, very hard to build a business, especially here, worth £1 billion, but actually it's comparatively easier to build one worth £300 million. And so if we can kind of eat crap in the first few years and get through the sort of tricky bit, now we've set ourselves up for success, and that's played out quite well.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Tom. So I guess related to that, what's the biggest risk you've taken in the journey?
Oh, God. We went all in pretty early days on the US. So I think I'm quite critical sometimes of like building things for small markets, because small markets tend to have a much lower bar in terms of competitiveness. And so you see a lot of businesses. So we sell predominantly in the US, the UK, and Europe, right, as a company. And the companies that we compete with in the UK are just awful. Like, they're really not very good at what they do at all. But they sort of exist in the UK because the UK market likes to buy from UK vendors. And so they get away with a lot, and they get a lot of free passes. I think the UK market is very big compared to Jersey, but absolutely tiny in comparison to the US. And so we lent in very hairy, very early days on, if we want to build a business worth 350 million pounds, we have to be able to win in the US. If we can't win in the US, that's just a pipe dream. It will never make sense. And so rather than kind of taking this like slowly, gently approach and going, let's win in Jersey, and then let's take that, and then let's win in the UK, and then 10 years later, let's take that and win in the US. We just went, screw it. Like, what do we need to do to win a deal in the US today? And we shaped a lot of the way that we build the company, a lot of the way that we hire, a lot of the way that we deliver the product experience around what's going to work in the US market. Yeah. But that's very risky because we're not in the US. We've never sold to the US. The US, when you do a Zoom call at 11 o'clock at night and it's dark outside and you've got a thick British accent, a lot of people in the US don't want to buy what you've got to sell them. Most of the people that we compete with are very good and have raised hundreds of millions of pounds. And so again, like, you're sort of like going into a bar and picking the biggest, most experienced person and having a fight with them, right? Like, it's not a sensible strategy. But if you win, you kind of get the respect of everyone.
Like a big bet.
Yeah. And so if we'd have spent all of our money and time and effort to do that and it hadn't panned out and we hadn't cracked that market, the business would have died before we'd even kind of got started. But fortunately, we've got a good team and we're good at what we do, and that panned out. And since then, obviously, it gets comparatively easier, right? But that's probably the biggest risk we took.
Thanks, Tom. And on the other side, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think kind of two answers to that question. I think from a skill and commerciality perspective, kind of most proud of the fact that we did what I just described. I cracked a large international market from basically the middle of nowhere. But also through the lens of we did that bootstrapped, right? We raised no money. And doing that, if you're in our space and you kind of play the game we're playing, like, people have a lot of respect for our ability to do that because it's just not done. It's like we sort of completely defied the rules of the game by doing that. So very, very, very proud of that. And then I think on the other side, so we didn't raise any money, but transparently, we did a deal last year with a private equity firm where they bought like a chunk of the company, which valued us at this 50 million number that I keep banding about. But that was all what we call secondary capital. So basically the money didn't go to the business, it went to shareholders. And what that allowed us to do is give every member of the team some money for some element of their shares. And so we created like a whole bunch of millionaires out of that process. We created a whole bunch of people who can now go buy houses they couldn't otherwise buy. And basically a lot of people made a lot of money. And I'm very proud of that because you can now kind of see the knock-on benefit of that. And
so rewarding.
Yeah, but like a lot of people put a lot of trust in me 3 years ago or 2 years ago when the business wasn't as externally sort of successful as it is now. And they left other jobs to come work at Pinpoint for less money, or they took a risk. Yeah. And to be able to reward that risk is probably the bit that's kind of most gratifying.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Hopefully we do it again in 3 or 4 years.
Thanks, Tom. And what have been your greatest learnings? And is there anything you would have done differently looking back?
Yeah, it's a really terrible answer, but probably not. Like, I think hindsight's a really valuable thing. And I think it's easy to have like very revisionist history and kind of tell a version of the story that isn't really the real story. I think we made loads of mistakes. I think the thing that we did well, and Tamsin talks about it before, is like we maintained momentum. Like every single day we shipped something, we did something, we sold something, we met someone, we hired someone. Like there was just this level of pace, and we still have this today. And like that's the thing that keeps me up at night. It's like, how do we make sure we never lose that velocity, right? Yeah. But like we maintained such high momentum that sort of mistakes kind of fell off the edges, and we really focused on the wins. And I think it's really hard to look back and go, oh well, if we'd have done that, we would have made that. I think we executed pretty well given the constraints in the environment. I think biggest learnings would probably just be it's really bloody hard to do this bootstrapped, and you have to kind of know what you're getting into. And I think a lot of people don't say this, but like some naivety I think is sometimes really valuable. So like we sell to HR professionals, and I love my industry, but I didn't wake up as a kid and go like, I hope to build recruitment software for HR company. Like do you know what I mean? That's not what I dreamt of doing as a child. And I think I didn't know a great deal about the industry that we sell into when we started the business. And I think if I knew what I knew now about the industry, I probably wouldn't have started the business, which is not meant to be impolite, but it's just like it's been hard. And so like I think the naivety is really valuable.
It can be a good thing. Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
Do you know what I mean? Like I think overthinking it, and talking about things 1,000 times and spending years on research. Sometimes it's kind of counterproductive, and you can
just get on
convince
with
yourself
it.
not to do things.
Yeah.
I would just kind of get on with it. But I would also caveat that with, I have been like a quote unquote entrepreneur since I was like a teenager, and I had no responsibilities, no children, no mortgage, and taking risks was very easy. Like taking risks later in life is much more difficult. And so for me, I think that risk appetite's always been very high, but I get totally and fully respect why that risk appetite fluctuates as your life evolves. But yeah, that's probably biggest learning.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that links into like the next question. Obviously at the moment, like we talk a lot about entrepreneurial mindset. Mm-hmm. And I think that risk appetite is a big part of it. What else do you think is important?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. I think perhaps my unpopular opinion is that I think most entrepreneurs care very little about what other people think. And I would say that basically everybody would have told me not to do everything I've ever done because it's sort of stupid at face value, and there's always better ways of doing things. And my family, when I was starting out, really just wanted me to get a real job, and they were very supportive. But I think entrepreneurs have to be willing to take feedback and listen and learn and cast a very wide net in terms of their sources of information, but also have like a very high degree of conviction and just go like, I hear you, but I don't care, and I'm going to do that anyway because I believe that that's the right thing to do. And I think that like counterproductive approach to things sometimes is where you create opportunity. And so, yeah, like a high degree of don't give a crapness, basically, I think is something I would look for in an entrepreneur.
Got you.
Yeah.
And are there any kind of tips you have for working on that kind of resilience?
Yeah, I would separate resilience from not caring. Yeah, so resilience is incredibly important, and I think like you're all already on this journey, and like entrepreneurialism is just peaks and troughs, right? And mainly troughs, to be honest. And so like you just have to get used to. I'm trying really hard not to swear, but you have to get used to just like eating crap all the time, right? Like it's really hard, and I think I worry sometimes that. Like, and this sounds like such an old man thing to say, but I'm only 31. Like when I wanted to be an entrepreneur, like it wasn't cool to start businesses and to run companies. It was actually a bit odd. Everybody I went to school with wanted to be an accountant, and but now like you have Instagram and a whole bunch of like influencers, and entrepreneurialism is very glamorized, and everybody wants to quit their jobs and sell some random thing on Shopify for a living. Like there's nothing like I love entrepreneurialism, but I think it's kind of being missold and it's kind of being misrepresented as this thing everybody should want to do. Actually, most people are probably not built for it. And I think you have all as a group self-selected in, which I think is epic. But like a lot of people start on that journey and aren't really built for it. And I also think that it frustrates me sometimes because I've met incredibly smart, awesome people who are amazing software developers or who are amazing graphic design, whatever, who leave jobs doing those things where they're having a massive impact to go start a business, and they're really not very good at running a business. And so I think like it's a skill set. But so I think, yeah, resilience is very important, and I think people underestimate how much of it you need. I think the don't give a crapness is somewhat a byproduct of confidence. And I think like I was a very, very introverted, very shy kid with no friends and didn't go outside basically. But I had a lot of external validation very early days because I would build something and people would tell me it was good, and I would build something and they would pay me for it and tell me they were happy with it. And irrelevant of how good I thought I was or irrelevant of how confident I was, if people keep telling you you're good and people keep rewarding you for doing the things you're doing with money, you sort of teach yourself that actually maybe I have a perspective that's respected. And it kind of fuels that.
And it builds the confidence.
It builds, exactly. Yeah. And you take some risks, and if they pay off,
cool.
You've got to balance that. And as I said, like my first business, I was extremely confident because basically I'd spent from the age of 16 to 21 constantly making more and more and more money and basically never putting a foot wrong. And I lulled myself into this false sense of security that I was basically invincible. And actually then the whole thing blew up. And that was a really useful, big, very humbling experience. But yeah, I don't really know how to teach you to not care about other people's opinions, but it is useful. Yeah,
definitely. Thanks, Tom. And what do you do for like self-development, do you try and carve out time for like reading or?
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I read a lot. I think you can learn a great deal about somebody by looking at their bookshelf, basically. Like if you came into my house, the thing that I care about is my bookshelf and showing you the books I have and collecting them because they tell stories about things I value and I care about. And I think that, things like this are useful to a degree, but like why listen to me who is like mediocre when you could read an autobiography of someone who's done what I've done 100 times better, right? And so like smart people and successful people tend to talk about their success and they tend to write about their success or someone writes about it for them. And my view is you're going to come across challenges as you grow. How can you preempt those challenges and kind of equip yourself with context to help you make decisions easier? And so my thing is, if we had like a graph of like the growth trajectory of the company, I'm always doing like a graph of my personal growth and I'm trying to stay on the other side of that. I'm trying to kind of constantly grow faster than my company is because otherwise I'm not the right person to lead it and someone else should be doing that job. And so I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time listening to things and podcasts and otherwise. And I travel a lot. I'm very fortunate because of the work that I do. I get to spend a lot of time with people. And I guess my ambition is always to be the stupidest person in the room and go surround myself with people who have just make me look insignificant, right? Because
it stretches you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you compete in a different environment.
What's your favourite business book then?
Oh,
is
God,
it,
that's
if you can choose one?
Yeah, that's a question. There's a lot. I think I tend to recommend a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by a chap called Ben Horowitz, because he talks very honestly about what it's like to run businesses much larger than mine, and some of the challenges that you'd like being a leader or a founder or whatever you all collectively call yourselves. It's an emotional challenge as much as anything else, right? And like maintaining that like emotional stability is very difficult, sometimes more for some people than others, and I'm quite lucky because I'm not a very emotional person, and so it doesn't bother me that much. But like, he talks very openly about what it's like to fire 1,000 people that don't deserve to be fired, and what he learned from that experience, and what it's like to take a company public, and what it's like to do these things. And I think, regardless of the stage you're at, you can in part relate to sort of the emotional challenge that he's talking to, and I think it kind of equips you to think about things differently.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. We'll have to check. I hadn't heard of that. We'll have to check that one out.
It's worth reading. Yeah.
And I know you're busy. What do you do to, do you have hobbies? Do you to relax? Do you try and switch off?
I wish, yeah. I will say that I think there's a time for hobbies. And this is going to sound really like robotic, but like I think that the part of the way that you win is by giving up everything else. And so like I was very happy, and I have a very understanding wife and now 2 young children. But like when I started my business, I basically just did that all day, every day, 7 days a week for 3 years, right? And I burn out loads of times, and I'm not endorsing overworking and things like that, but I kind of am. Because basically if you're not, like the way I look at it, right, is it's like if each of you is starting a business in a certain sector, trying to do something, do whatever, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're competing with someone, and like that someone might be me, and I might be willing to just outwork you wildly, right? And I think I basically didn't want to find myself in an environment where I felt like I had the skills or the idea or whatever, but we lost because someone just put the time in and I didn't. And so I basically just kind of gave up everything for like the first few years. But then there comes a point when the team gets bigger and where there's people around you and where there's things different, where actually like now I very consciously try not to overwork, because my job is very different now, right? Like I've gone from running sprints to running marathons because the business is bigger, and I have to keep doing this job for like 10 more years. And so now I'm trying to get healthy again, and like I try and have hobbies and I do other things. So like I like cars, basically.
Okay.
I've taken a long time to tell you that I like cars, but I like cars. That's my hobby.
That's your hobby.
That's
okay.
my hobby. That'll do, yeah. But there's a time and a place for it, yeah.
But now you're finding maybe that you have a bit more time to have a break. And
now I basically try and finish work at like 6 o'clock. I've got 2 young kids. I put my kids to bed and make a very conscious effort to do that. I work a little bit in the evening because we have a team, time zones are a problem and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I work on a Sunday. But I make sure Saturday is like family day, and then I travel a bit and I do car things. And yeah, like I'm trying to focus a lot more on like sustainability now.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm caveating all of this is because what I don't want you to think my advice is focus on sustainability on day one of your business, because someone who doesn't will beat you, is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Thanks,
as much
Tom.
as that's unpopular advice, and I apologise for that.
No, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. If we move on to Jersey, because we all know that Jersey is a unique place. It's a great place.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, what's it like? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the good things?
Yeah.
What's your perspective?
There's definitely both, right? I think what I would say is I'm biased because I've done it here and I work at Digital Jersey and yada, yada, yada. But like what I would say is we have built our business from Jersey, and in the nicest way possible, it's kind of made no difference. And what I mean by that is Jersey hasn't massively helped us, but it has also really in no way hindered us. And I think a lot of people like to use Jersey as an excuse, and they say, oh, my business doesn't work because I couldn't raise money, or because it's hard to run a company in Jersey, or because of blah, blah, blah. If your business didn't work, it's because of you, right? Like Jersey is not the problem. Jersey is a great place to live. Well, you've all chosen to be here, so I don't really need to sell you on that. I think like we have a team in Jersey. We also have a team in the UK. We also have a team in lots of different places, predominantly the US. It doesn't really matter where you're physically based. And I think we love it here because we have a great lifestyle. It's an amazing place to have kids. And I think the thing that's really important, and the thing that I've sort of appreciated more as A, I've got older, and B, the business has got bigger, is like the sense of community here is really important.
Yeah.
And I think if you spend some time and you look at like when people talk about like building startups, certainly in my space in sort of software, everybody talks about Silicon Valley as like the case study of success, right? And if you spend some time and you look at what makes Silicon Valley successful, what it really comes down to is like community and density. And so when you're there, you can go to a bar and actually everybody in the bar is also running a startup, and you can have a chat with them about it, and you can hire some of them. And what happens is everybody in this room builds businesses. Half of them fail, but the half of them that fail go become employees at the half that are doing well. And that creates scale and opportunity, and it creates just this dense community of incredibly smart people. And I think what's great about Jersey is that it's a very small place, so it doesn't take that many people to create that sense of talent density and community.
Yeah.
And it also, the thing that Silicon Valley has done very well is Silicon Valley was very successful in the 60s, and it created a lot of folks who made a lot of money, and they put that money back into startups, and they had high risk appetite because they'd seen and done the things that you guys were all doing. I think Jersey's actually starting to see a bit of that, and Pinpoint has been moderately successful, and there's a bunch of other stories like that as well. And actually, there's now people who are willing to invest money in startups, and there are people who, bluntly, are smart money and not dumb money, right? They can give you money and advice and help you and connect you and guide you. And in Silicon Valley, you need 20,000 people to make that a reality. In Jersey, 100 would probably achieve the same result.
Yeah, that's true.
That's really exciting to me, because I spend a lot of time thinking about my son, who is 7. How can we make the environment here conducive such that if he wanted to start a business in 10 years, it would be the best place in the world to do that? Yeah. And I do believe that's possible. And so there's pros and cons, but you're all already here, so it doesn't seem that hard to sell, right? Yeah,
that's true. I think we've all noticed in the process as well, like the accessibility of people willing to help out, and you can meet people, you can meet stakeholders, you can get meetings, networking can be quite effective.
100%.
Which is quite cool.
And to be clear, I mean, a real world example of this, a lot of our first clients at Pinpoint were Jersey companies, and they were Jersey offices of very big companies. So we work with people like, I don't know, KPMG and like Canaccord and businesses of that nature, but also people like Jersey Post and Jersey Electricity and folks like that. And actually, whilst that was great because we could just knock on doors or meet people through the community, and that gave us our kind of first bits of revenue, it was also incredibly valuable because when I was speaking to someone in the UK, I could say, hey, we work with KPMG, and they all know who that means. They all know who that is, that there's like social proof and brand validity there. Yeah. And if we were in London, I would never have got KPMG London as client number, whatever. But Jersey actually was a really good kind of springboard for that activity. Yeah. And we shouldn't undermine the difference that made to the business.
Yeah, that's a really great opportunity. Yeah, definitely.
So you're 100% right.
Thanks, Tom. Well, I know we're keen to get to the questions from these guys, but if we could just finish with like one piece of advice for the boot campers at this stage in the process. So it's week 3. Yeah. We've got 9 more weeks left. Yeah. What would you say as advice?
I'm not good at this bit. Yeah, look, it's just, I guess I would just say it's going to be really difficult, but you should have known that when you signed up. And if you're still here at the end, you should take a lot of pride in that, and it should give you confidence that the next 12 weeks and the 12 weeks after that and the 12 weeks after that will get easier. I think there's a saying, clearly I'm not a cyclist, but there is a saying from a chap called Greg LeMond, who's a famous winning cyclist, that basically cycling is really painful. What he said is it never gets easier, you just go faster. And I guess that would be like my analogy for everything I've ever done at work, is that like it was pretty crap on the first day and it's still pretty crap now, but like it's just much bigger crap now, and you go a lot faster and there's a lot more reward and there's a lot more people and it's a lot more interesting. It's still really hard. And so like if you can tolerate this 12 weeks, you can sort of tolerate the next 12 years, but the next 12 years should give you something back, whereas this is pretty one-sided. And so yeah, I'm not an advice person, but I guess that's the only comment I'd leave you with.
Thanks, Tom. It's been great to learn more about Pinpoint, especially some of the stories from the early days.
Yeah, sure.